Miss Marple and Poirot get a lot of attention as Agatha Christie's most famous fictional detectives. Few people are aware of her lesser-known investigators, Tommy and Tuppence, Parker Pyne, Harley Quinn, and a host of one-offs. Personally, I have a great liking for Superintendent Battle. I don't know his first name. Superintendent Battle appears in 5 Agatha Christie novels, usually as a helper ally to the protagonist. One of those novels is Cards on the Table, probably the closest thing we ever got to an Agatha Christie super crossover story, in which Battle assists Poirot. Strangely, out of all the adaptations of novels featuring Superintendent Battle, nearly every time he's removed from the story. The only 2 times he made it to the screen, I don't think he was cast very well. His original introduction in The Secret of Chimneys describes him as a squarely built, middle-aged man with a face so singularly devoid of expression as to be quite remarkable. So, maybe a better casting choice would be... The story we're going to discuss today is the one single novel in which Battle himself is the primary investigator, and my second favorite Christie novel, Towards Zero. Towards Zero, also titled Come and Be Hanged, was published in 1944. Christie also adapted the story into a stage play in 1956. It's had 4 film adaptations, but there's no way I'm going to cover all of them in this video. One of them is part of the series Les Petits Meurtres d'Agatha Christie, so, as always, we're going to ignore that. The 1995 film Innocent Lies we're also going to ignore because it's weird. As for the French film Zéro, I just can't stand this version of Superintendent Battle. Like, why is he wearing a hat? So that leaves us with the version where Battle is played by Miss Marple, of course. Before we start, here's the complimentary spoiler warning. Towards Zero is set up differently from other Christie novels. The premise is established in the prologue, where seasoned criminologist Mr. Treves remarks that murder mysteries begin in the wrong place.
The murder evolves over years, with all the causes and events bringing certain people to a certain place at a certain time. All, what's the word?
Converging, Mr. Treves?
That's it. The 0 hour. All converging. Converging.
Towards Zero?
We're then taken through the course of a year, witnessing seemingly unrelated people and events in different locations. An attempted suicide named Andrew McWhirter is told he might one day save someone's life, perhaps without even knowing it. A number of people make plans to visit the wealthy Lady Camilla Tressilian in September. And an unnamed person works out a careful plot for murder. We're also introduced to Superintendent Battle in a favorite scene of mine. His teenage daughter Sylvia has been accused of theft at her school, and she's confessed to it. However, Battle, being an experienced police officer, can see at once that she's innocent. She only confessed because being under suspicion made her frightened. Confessing felt to her like relief. Battle admits he doesn't understand and calls her a very unusual type of liar, but rather than try to change her, he accepts her. As for the characters gathering at Gull's Point, the home of Camilla, first we have her godson, Neville Strange. Neville proposes the bright idea of going to visit Camilla with Kay, his wife, at the same time as Audrey, his ex-wife. That plan couldn't go wrong.
Jennifer, this is Jill, my other girlfriend. I think we can make this work.
Kay hates this idea, and so does Camilla, even though she doesn't like Kay. Camilla and her companion, Mary Alden, both think that someone put this crazy idea into Neville's head, but they don't agree on who it was. Kay tries to make Neville jealous by flirting with her former lover, Ted Latimer. Ted is infatuated with Kay, so he is over the moon, even though he knows he's being used. The last visitor is Thomas Royd, who hasn't been back to England since his brother Adrian tragically died in an accident. Others suspect he wants to court Audrey, for whom he used to pine until Neville married her. Mary likes Thomas, so this makes her jealous. As soon as they're all assembled, the tension is thick. Neville can't seem to decide which wife he's into, and it makes both Mrs. Stranges uncomfortable, but he stubbornly insists everything's fine. Thomas keeps trying to get a moment alone with Audrey, but Neville keeps getting in the way. Ted absolutely dislikes Neville, but Neville doesn't seem to notice. It's like, Neville, go home. Mr. Treves comes over for dinner one night, and after meeting everyone, he talks about a case from years ago in which a child accidentally killed a friend with a bow and arrow. It was no accident, he says. That child deliberately committed murder and got away with it. Treves will always be able to recognize that child by a physical peculiarity. So, as you might have guessed, that child, now grown up, is in the room, and Mr. Treves is warning the murderer that if any mischief happens, he'll know who's responsible. Well, most inconveniently, all 6 of the suspects have physical peculiarities. Mary has a lock of white hair, Kay has a unique shade of red hair, Audrey has a scar on her ear, Thomas has a weird shoulder, Ted has a weird skull, and Neville has a pinky that's longer than the other. So, no help there. Mr. Treves goes back to his hotel, which is, like, next door. And get this, the murderer has snuck over and put an out-of-order sign on the elevator, so Mr. Treves has to take the stairs, which gives him a heart attack. How's that for a murder method? Dude, just regenerate. Let's take a break and look at how the film begins. We start out with a flash forward, wherein Mr. Treves has his Towards Zero conversation with Miss Marple. Then we go back, and just like in the book, we see everyone, as he said, converging on Gull's Point. Though, without Superintendent Battle or Andrew McWhirter, there aren't as many people to converge. And since the people who do converge all converge for the reason of visiting Camilla, well, the converging isn't really that remarkable anymore. Miss Marple is there because apparently she was at school with Camilla. There's a weird scene where she thinks Neville's about to jump off a cliff and she tries to stop him, but it doesn't really go anywhere. She speaks a few lines to other characters that were spoken by Mary in the book. That's about it for the changes. The rest is all just like the book so far. At least as far as the plot. The characters, on the other hand... Okay, so normally I don't nitpick about this because yes, you can change characters and still be true to the original story. But you can't change some aspects if they're integral to other elements of the story that you keep. For example, Neville is understandably awkward around his wife and his ex. No doubt he's regretting bringing Kay here while Audrey's visiting. He's so adamant that this was his idea that we're led to the unasked question, who really put the idea in his head? As in, who's manipulating Neville and everyone else? And to what end? Well, this only works if you keep Neville's defining characteristic, which is that he's a dingbat. A hot dingbat, but still a dingbat. Neville's film counterpart comes off more as a creepy control freak. At the very least, he should be petulant. And another thing, in both book and film, they refer to him as the perennial sportsman, who never gets mad over a competition. This is to underscore the idea that wherever the tension is coming from in Gull's Point, it's not coming from him. But the film gets this wrong too.
I say, that Merrick's doing rather well, isn't he? Gave you a damn good thrashing at any rate, eh?
Book Neville would have laughed at this dig. But if film Neville is going to get tense about it, then the other film characters have no reason to call him a sportsman. It's not consistent. This is getting aggravating, so I'm going to go back to the book. Neville tells Audrey he's made a mistake and wants to divorce Kay so he can remarry her. Kay overhears and threatens to kill them both. Camilla also overhears and forbids Neville from this course of action. They have a fight, and someone overhears. That night, Lady Camilla Tressilian is murdered. Which means that finally Superintendent Battle comes back into the story. At first glance, all the evidence points to Neville being the murderer. Not only did he fight with Camilla, but the murder weapon was his golf club, and they find a suit of his with blood on it. Camilla's nurse was drugged, so she couldn't come if Camilla rang for her. But Battle knows something's off. For one thing, from the angle of the fatal blow, the killer was likely left-handed. Neville is right-handed. And if Neville drugged the nurse because he was planning to murder his godmother, wouldn't he have been careful not to incriminate himself by fighting with the victim and using his own golf club? When Camilla's nurse wakes up, she tells the police that Camilla rang for her and she saw Camilla alive, after Neville left the house. Battle figures out that the real murder weapon was a steel fender knob. The golf club was planted. So, who's trying to frame Neville? At long last, Andrew McWhirter makes his reappearance. He returns to the spot where 1 year previously he attempted suicide. He has no intention of trying again, but he still feels bitter at having been stopped. Suddenly, someone else runs toward the cliff edge, but he stops her just in time. It's Audrey. He tells her, ironically, no amount of unhappiness is worth taking your own life. But she says it's not unhappiness, it's fear. Although he doesn't know what's going on, Andrew promises to protect her. I have to go back to the film now to point out my least favorite difference from the book. As before, apart from the presence of Miss Marple, the adaptation is quite faithful to the story. You can always count on screenwriter Kevin Elliott to include all the important clues, which I appreciate. Instead of Superintendent Battle, we have Superintendent Mallard, which... why? Miss Marple tells him about the murder of Mr. Treves and directs them to the actual murder weapon. Then Kay flips out at Audrey, and for some reason that sends her running for the cliff. But here, it's Neville who stops her.
You're so unhappy, aren't you?
No. No, she's not. The whole point of Audrey is that up until this point, she's been an enigma. Everything we've learned about her has come from other characters' points of view. Some suspect she's mentally unbalanced. Kay thinks she's insanely jealous. Both Mary and Battle have sensed that she's hiding some strong, powerful emotion, and this is the moment we're supposed to discover what that emotion is. She's afraid. It's that revelation that drives the remainder of the story. Without the characters of Battle or Andrew, Miss Marple should have been the one to stop her, to promise to help her. Instead, we get this uncomfortable scene with Neville, and since the film's been chock full of uncomfortable scenes, this doesn't really advance anything. There's one other thing I dislike about this scene, but I'm going to save it for later. In the book, Andrew quickly brings himself up to speed on the murder case. It seems Audrey was right to be worried because all of the new evidence stacks up against her, including the fact that she inherits a fortune from Camilla. Neville swears Audrey doesn't hate him and would never try to frame him. Thomas reinforces this by revealing a long-kept secret, that it wasn't Neville who left Audrey. Audrey left Neville for Thomas's brother Adrian, who was killed shortly thereafter in a car accident. Neville pretended it was the other way around out of chivalry, but Battle insists it's his duty to arrest Audrey based on the evidence, and when he does, she confesses, flashing him back to the episode with his daughter. Before we go any farther, final spoiler warning. Andrew locates a certain length of rope, then goes to Superintendent Battle and tells him he saw someone climbing that rope the night of the murder, though in the end it turns out he saw nothing. Andrew had merely deduced that the killer did climb that rope. Between them, they arrange a trap for the real murderer, Neville Strange. He hated Audrey for leaving him, so he murdered Camilla solely for the purpose of getting Audrey arrested, and then hanged. He killed his godmother using his backhand, something he was good at as a tennis player, in order to simulate left-handedness. He left the first set of evidence against himself, and he faked the ringing of Camilla's bell so her nurse could give him an alibi. It was his extra-long pinky that Treves had recognized, and Neville killed him too. Most likely, he also killed Adrian. The trap works. Neville confesses. It's implied that Thomas and Mary end up together, and presumably so do Ted and Kay. Audrey, fearful since the day she married Neville, though she was never conscious of what or whom she feared, is afraid no longer, and she ends up with Andrew. Yay! Okay, back to the film. Many entries in the newer Miss Marple series contain too much to follow at too fast a pace. This one has the opposite problem. If you're going to have someone else investigating the mystery who reports back to Miss Marple every now and then, you have to give us a chance to like this other investigator. Otherwise, we're just sitting, waiting for Miss Marple to come back so the plot can pick up again, which, I admit, does happen in the last third of the film, as she starts to investigate more on her own. In fact, I started to like it a lot more toward the end. The one thing I wish is that when Miss Marple reveals that Audrey left Neville for Adrian, she could have explained a bit better how she figured it out.
One hears things, sees things, gradually a picture forms.
Yeah, but what things? One clue would have been nice. On the other hand, with regard to Neville, there have been too many clues. As we know now, he really is a creepy control freak who can't handle being dumped. But that's not much of a twist if he seemed that way to begin with. From the start, his character in the film has been inconsistent. Like, the supposed love of Neville's life has just been arrested, so why is he sitting relaxed on this boat? And then there's that earlier scene when he stopped Audrey from going over the cliff.
You'll always be mine. Till the day you die.
How is that not a giveaway? Anyway, they replace Battle telling what Andrew says he saw with Miss Marple claiming, falsely, that another hotel guest saw someone climbing the rope after swimming across the bay. And it's Miss Marple, instead of Battle, who pushes Ted into the water to prove he can't swim, which I thought was funny. At the end, Audrey ends up with Thomas, unlike in the book, although the two of them also end up together in the stage play version. So, to sum up, even though Battle is the sole investigator, in the end he still functions as a helper ally to the main protagonist, which in this case ultimately is Andrew McWhirter. Battle is like the Agent Coulson, or the Nick Fury of the Agatha Christie universe. Maybe that's why he's always ignored. Which begs the question, do you really think ignoring Nick Fury is a good idea? As for the movie, although it does improve toward the end, this is not a great adaptation, though it's not because of the addition of Miss Marple. It's because of wonky pacing and the botched characterization of Neville, which, incidentally, also happens in the film Zéro. They make the exact same mistakes, which irks me. My recommendation is to read the book and to pray that someone gives this story and Superintendent Battle another chance at adaptation sometime in the future. Thanks for watching, and keep an eye out for the next one.